Starting with the CPU, this is the Ryzen 5 7600X. Now, the 7600 and the 7600X have been my go-to recommendations for the past year when you want to prioritize GPU performance, because, well, they are more than fast enough for all of today's games. They're almost always priced within around $10 of each other, with the 7600 including a CPU cooler and a lower TDP, but that 7600X does have a slight performance advantage. And considering we're going to be going with our own low-profile CPU cooler in this build, I think it just makes more sense to go with the X. This is still on the newest AM5 platform, so you're going to get that high performance today and upgradability for the future. Now, the 9000 equivalent CPUs are out right now, and even though we have seen some discounts on them already, I still feel at this point in time, they are not as good as a value as these are. As for the board that we're going to be plugging this into, I'm going to be trying out the ASRock A620i. Now, mini ITX, especially newer AM5 boards, are fairly expensive, which makes, building ITX on a budget a little bit more challenging. However, this board comes in at a pretty reasonable price for ITX standards. I picked this one up for $130. Now, I typically go for B series boards myself, but this A series board is actually looking really good and likely going to be something I use in a lot of builds going forward. You still get Wi-Fi 6E built in, dual M.2 slots, and a mostly decent selection of I/O. Now, the good thing here is that you have a Gen 2 USB-C port, along with 2 more USB Type-A Gen 2 ports. All of these are capable of up to 10 gigabits per second. With A-series boards, you don't typically get a lot of USB. With that said, 5 total Type-A's and a Type-C should cover all of the needs for most gaming builds. Now, the motherboard's not going to affect your performance in any way. Aside from maybe some overclocking features that are present on more expensive boards, you really just need to look for a compatible board that has all the I/O and case headers that you need, along with any other features that are important to you, like Wi-Fi as an example. Now, I recently used the Gigabyte A620i, and I was really impressed with everything it offered. I had a lot of you guys tell me to check out this ASRock one, and I can already see why. Because compared to the Gigabyte board, I like that we have the integrated I/O shield, and you actually get 2 M.2 slots instead of the one that's on Gigabytes. Now, if you've watched any of my previous videos, then you already know what I'm gonna say about the RAM. DDR5 6000 is the way to go here, and this set I have from Team Group has a cast latency of 30 and a first word latency of 10 nanoseconds, which, if you don't know what any of that means, just know that it's very fast and one of the best price to performance sets that you can pick up, in my opinion. Now, you can get this 32 gig set for around $90, so DDR5 has gotten so much cheaper, which sets us up nicely to have a build that will perform well today and last a long time into the future. Also, if you can, go with 32 gigs. 16 is enough to get by for now, but you're really not gonna be leaving yourself with a lot of headroom for any multitasking. And if you went with 16 and you inevitably needed to increase it to 32, you'll have to outright replace those 2 gigabyte sticks with 16s because you only get 2 DIMM slots on an ITX board. Okay, for storage, I'm gonna be going with a 1 terabyte Crucial P3 Plus SSD. Their P3 Plus line is fast enough for games and most productivity stuff, and they are fairly priced. I paid $60 for this 1 terabyte stick, and you also have that additional slot on the back of the board if you ever need to expand it. Now, we're pretty limited on CPU cooler height in this case. We've got up to 60 millimeters to work with. So previously, I've used the ID Cooling IS55, which worked really well with the 5600X build that I did a year ago. Now today, I want to try something else. This is the Thermalright Full Copper Edition. I've used the smaller 47 millimeter cooler in a Velka 7 build video, and I was really happy with it. So I figured it's worth giving this one a shot. Now, if you're trying to save a bit here, the ID Cooling is less expensive at around $30, but I did pick up this Thermalright cooler for $50. Installation is straightforward enough. We just need to replace the default LGA brackets with the AM5 ones, screw on these long standoffs. Then once we put the thermal paste on the CPU, those standoffs go through the 4 holes on the motherboard. Once you flip the motherboard over, we can just secure them on the backside. So now we're ready for the case. And for this build, I'm gonna be going with the S300. This will be my second build in this case. My first one, again, was over a year ago, and taking this out of the box for the first time, I completely forgot how tiny this case is. I don't know why, but in my head, I thought it was similar to the T1 in size, but it's actually a lot smaller. And with the handle, it's really easy to pick this up and bring it around to another room or whatever. Also, the overall design, it's really simple and clean, which I appreciate. I think this design just appeals to a lot more people in general, and yeah, it's just a solid little case. Now, we have some flex on the side panels, not too big of a deal. They don't feel like they're gonna bend just by handling them or anything like that. We also have some case I/O on one side for the power button, USB, and USB-C. The rest of the case is all metal as well, and super rigid. It's going for around $100 right now, so it should also fit pretty nicely in this budget. With that lower price, you do miss out on some of the flexibility that something like a T1 might offer. But on the flip side, if you're okay with those limitations, it makes the build process very simple. So we just got a couple of screws for the side panel to slide them off. Then we have room at the bottom for a slim fan. I'm going to actually take advantage of that position under the motherboard. I'm also going to put a fan grill on the fan to prevent any of my cables from hitting it. Now it's a pretty tight fit with the grill, so I actually had to install the fan first and then slip the grill in after it. Now before dropping in the motherboard, there are still a few things we should do first. First, I found that it's a little bit easier just to remove the power supply bracket. So that's just a couple of screws on the top here, one on the opposite side. And then we need to route our PCI Express riser cable through this hole because there's just not going to be enough room after the board's installed. I think at one point there was a Gen 4 riser cable option with this case. I don't see it now, so if you're thinking about picking this up, you might want to consider also getting a Gen 4 riser cable. This is a dual reverse at 190 millimeters. The motherboard drops in upside down, so we can line the 4 holes with the standoffs and then secure it. Then we can just plug in a case IO, so that's the power button and light, USB-C, and the USB 3. For the power supply, I'm going to be going with the Corsair SF750. I use this thing all the time. It's probably the most popular one in the community, but that's for very good reasons. One, it's super reliable, it's 80+ platinum rated, but it's more expensive than some of the other options out there. Now, if you want to save some money, then absolutely, you could save around $40 or so on a different and perfectly good power supply. But there's another reason in addition to everything else that I still recommend the one I'm going with here. And that's because most of those less expensive power supplies, you don't get these higher quality braided cables. These are just so much easier to work with. I personally think that they look a lot better as well, and they make the build and the cable management just significantly more enjoyable. Now, after securing the bracket to the power supply, I would recommend plugging in all your power cables before dropping it into the case. So for me, that's the motherboard connector, CPU power connector, and the 12-volt high power cable for the GPU. From there, we can plug those first two into the motherboard, and at this point, I realized that the fan grill is a little bit in the way of the CPU power cable. Now, this took a little bit of trial and error, but I was able to get it plugged in. In hindsight, I probably didn't need the grill. I don't have a ton of wires in this area, but it's already here and it's not really hurting anything. At this point in the build, we've spent somewhere around $850, and I look at this as a really good base. From here, the rest of your budget goes to the GPU. And to get the most of your money, you can check out this video sponsor, Jawa.gg. So Jawa is the #1 gaming marketplace online where you can find all sorts of deals to buy used or new components or custom PCs, but also where you can sell things yourself. See, the whole idea here is to help gamers buy and sell online without any of the risks of scamming or scalping that you see on other marketplaces. Now, there's a few ways that you can save even more here. First, you can get $10 off just by using my code DJ10 and follow the link in the description. And if you're upgrading from an existing gaming PC, you can take your existing GPU and sell it on Jawa's site. They have an instant offer option, which allows you to sell your GPU directly to Jawa. Now, once you ship that off, most sellers get paid within a single business day. Or if you want full control over the pricing, you can list it yourself. Now, you can also buy complete systems if you don't have the time to build yourself, but if you do, but just need a bit of help, you can join their 10,000 member Discord. So if you're wanting to save some money on your next build, definitely go and check out Jawa.gg. For this build, I will be using a new GPU, and that's just because the used market changes, prices naturally fluctuate, and you can find some of the best deals that way. But I find that it's just easier for people to follow a build video like this when I stick to new pricing. So I'm gonna be going with the Asus Prime 4070 Super. This is a 2.5 slot card, 269 millimeters in length, which fits really nicely here with some extra room in the case because this case actually supports up to a 2.5 slot card, but up to 305 millimeters in length. The 4070 Super has been one of my favorite cards of this generation. If I was building today, in my opinion, this is the current sweet spot, at least when it comes to pricing, performance, and features. If ray tracing is important to you, you're going to get far better ray tracing performance than an AMD equivalent at this price point. You get DLSS 3, which is the best upscaling available right now, and if you do play story-based games, there's frame generation, which will help smooth out gameplay and even more. Anyway, like I said, I feel like this has been the sweet spot this generation, and I'm really liking this Prime one from Asus. It's got a dual mode BIOS for quiet mode or factory overclock performance mode. It's pretty lightweight, which is gonna work out well here considering that this PC, is something that you can move around with the handle. And from an aesthetics standpoint, no loud designs or anything crazy like that, just an understated matte black color scheme, which I really appreciate. So now I'm going to plug in our 12-volt high power cable, make sure that it's fully seated, and then plug the card into the PCI Express slot. And with that, the build is complete. Okay, so now I've got a fresh install of Windows on here. I've downloaded a few games and my monitoring software. I also turned on the Expo profile in the BIOS so that we get those advertised RAM speeds. The slim case fan is definitely the loudest thing here once you get to those higher speeds. So I ended up setting that one to the silent profile in the BIOS, and then my CPU fan to the performance profile. And if you want more granular control over the fans, you can download something like Fan Control, but I found that the BIOS settings work fine for me. I'm measuring it at around 48 decibels, which for me, sitting about a foot away from the PC, I can absolutely hear it. But the sound it's producing, it's not annoying or anything like that. The cooler is holding up well. Testing Black Ops 6 at 1440p in a multiplayer match, I'm seeing around 78 degrees on the CPU, 60 on the GPU, while getting around 120 frames per second. I don't think those temps are bad or anything, but I wanted to see if disabling PBO would make a difference. So after turning that off, I'm seeing the temps reduced by around 3 degrees. I do consider the 4070 Super to be a 1440p card, but you can comfortably get over 60 frames per second in most games at 4K, especially if you utilize DLSS. So in Black Ops, at the extreme preset, using DLSS quality, I'm getting around 60 to 70 frames per second. Jumping into the finals, 1440p at the highest preset with DLSS off, I'm getting around 80 frames per second. And then just to test a more graphically demanding game, looking at Ghost of Tsushima at 4K and DLSS quality, I'm seeing 65 frames, and both the CPU and the GPU are sitting around 70 degrees Celsius. So yeah, a pretty powerful little machine. I think if I was building something today around the $1,500 mark, this is probably what I would go for.